If you want to support Slope's Game Room, then please click the links that you see in the top comments. Let's talk about South Park, one of the longest running major tent pillars in the animated comedy world, that is our lives. Damn, 22 seasons so far as the making of this video, starting all the way back in August of 1997, and still going strong with future seasons already planned for a release. Little Kenny's decapitated body is the image you see when you look up the word legendary, which sadly isn't the same for the games. Yet when something as big as South Park has the impact that it does on our stupid world, obviously it's not gonna be long before companies jump on board to create video games based on that franchise in order to get some of that sweet dough. Iguana Entertainment, Acclaim Studios, Tantalus Studios, Double Six, Ocean Interactive, Obsidian Entertainment, Ubisoft and Red Lynx, among many others, have all released or tried to release games in this franchise, and although the games did indeed start off pretty damn bad, they surprisingly ended up probably being better than anybody here could have ever imagined. Why is that? Well, I think it's about time we find out in this video documenting it all. Hi everybody, I'm DJ Slope from Slope's Game Room, and this is South Park, the history and the games. The story of South Park actually starts way back in a Colorado university where both Trey Parker and Matt Stone met for the very first time. Even though Matt had a major in maths and Trey had a major in music, the duo really hit it off as they shared a very warped sense of humour. During film class, they often found themselves having to work on the lights and basically just didn't do too much more than simply standing around. This was obviously very boring, but Matt and Trey constantly found ways to entertain themselves by doing silly, vulgar kids' voices to each other to make the other one laugh. This friendship grew, and these silly voices continued to form into characters of their own over the next year or so. During this time, Trey created a short animated clip entitled American History, which was a comical look at 300 years of, you guessed it, American history, that shared a striking, although extremely crude, resemblance to the animation style that the two would eventually be known for. This style went one step further when they decided to work on a new short called Jesus vs. Frosty, which would be played at a short film showcased at the very end of the year. This was it, guys, the birth of Kyle, Kenny, Stan and Cartman, and although the names are not actually spoken in the short, you do get plenty of humour and of course style in this flick that would eventually become the South Park that we know of today. But before hitting it big and continuing on this path, the two ended up making Cannibal the Musical, which yes, you can indeed watch online if you want to, and although it's cheap as hell, it's got Matt and Trey's style all over it.
I know that there's more to life than women. I just can't seem to figure out what else there is. I don't need it every night. Every morning it'd be just fine. A little sex, that's all I'm asking for. That's all I'm asking for. That's all he's asking for.
A guy over at Fox liked what he saw and desperately wanted to work with the two on, well, anything. Even though most studios turned their nose up at Cannibal the Musical, this guy knew that the two had something special and continued to try and help them. After several failed attempts at new shows and ideas, including a kids show, would you believe? Desperate to get anything off the ground, the guy from Fox actually ended up giving Trey and Parker $1,200 to further push that whole Jesus vs. Frosty thing that they did at uni. And The Spirit of Christmas, a short 5-minute expansion on the South Park universe, was made.
We wish you a Merry Christmas. Wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. Wait Wait a minute. What?
Aren't you Jewish, Kyle?
Yeah, I think so.
Dude, Jewish people don't celebrate Christmas.
What?
You're supposed to sing Hanukkah songs.
Dreidel, dreidel, dreidel.
Literally nothing here was expected to go very far. This was just for the guy at Fox's own amusement. Heck, even Matt and Trey themselves didn't even bother putting their names on the piece, as they thought it would just simply be pointless on something created, just for fun. The Fox guy sent about 35 copies on VHS to a few friends, nobody too highly ranked of course. I mean, this was really vulgar entertainment here, and everyone he showed it to seemed to like it. Those 35 or so people created several tapes and gave them to their friends, and eventually it landed in the hands of, this is so crazy, into the hands of George Clooney. Yes. Everyone's favourite Dark Knight was apparently quite a big fan of the short, and in the days before stuff like YouTube, he too showed plenty of people who also rather liked it. In fact, it's actually believed that if George Clooney didn't make hundreds of copies of VHS tape, which apparently he did, of a 5 bloody minute video and shipping it to all of his Hollywood friends, then there is a slight chance that South Park just wouldn't have existed. The tapes become so incredibly viral in the Hollywood Hills that apparently at one Hollywood party, Matt and Trey ended up being shown the tape by somebody else who claimed that they knew the guy who made it, and that person was actually going to be going for a meeting regarding this tape with MTV. This was obviously all absolute tosh, and the boys quickly got it all sorted out. Sadly, even though the duo got plenty of offers from other studios, including ones inviting them to direct a Barney movie of all things, nobody wanted to actually risk turning this into what it would eventually become. Not just because of the foul-mouthed children found on the screen, but the fact that it was children and not a family, like for instance, I don't know, The Simpsons, I suppose. The studios just simply believed that adults wouldn't want to watch it. But where everybody else turned it down, Comedy Central gave them a chance. After plenty of focus groups all scored the eventual pilot show badly, some of which were actually 1 out of 10, and according to reports, a few people in those focus groups even burst into tears watching the children be so vulgar, Comedy Central's top dog decided that this sort of thing was different enough to simply just ignore what they were saying, and he went ahead with it anyway. Scared about what might happen to his struggling Comedy Central network, and if putting something like this on air was even legal, he went ahead with it anyway, and as you all know, it turned out pretty damn good for all involved.
Finally, it is only a cartoon, but it rarely fails to be controversial. South Park, which in the past has offended everyone from Tom Cruise to Bill Clinton, has now turned its guns on the Queen, and this time, literally. An episode on US TV this week shows the monarch shooting herself in the head. No word yet as to whether she's amused, but as Harry Smith reports, plenty of others are not.
Well, except for the video games, that is. When South Park hit the air, it's all anybody was talking about. Yes, 1997 was the original date of release, and then, only 1 year later in 1998 for Nintendo 64 players, a few months later bringing us into 1999 for PC gamers, and a half a year later from that for PlayStation owners, we got our first game, titled, you guessed it, South Park.
Now, with PlayStation, you will believe an ass this fat can fit into a package this small.
I'm not fat. I'm getting in shape.
You better be, because South Park is under attack.
Kick you in the nuts.
Super, thanks for asking. Okay, you're going to jail.
Oh, I get to box.
Hey, stupid, I'm over here. Woo, woo.
Comedy Central South Park, now on PlayStation. From Acclaim.
In the only game bigger than Cartman's big fat ass. Yeah, it's very good, very good. The game was being created by Iguana Entertainment, the guys responsible for such titles as Turok, and it was actually the Turok 2 engine that the team used to make this game. The rights for the game actually got snatched up during season 1 whilst the show was on air, and although proving popular, it was still very much breaking ground at this point. On top of that, the original N64 release had to be ready for Christmas that year, giving the crew only 6 months to complete this entire game. The end result was slightly comical for the first 5 minutes or so, and an absolute bore for the rest. Obviously, taking that Turok 2 engine, the game is also a first-person shooter, just painted with all things South Park, of course. The game is essentially loads of getting from point A to point B, destroying bad guys along the way. It's incredibly standard in that regard. But the gameplay itself is incredibly below standard, with its overwhelming array of the same enemies that simply just run towards you over and over and over again. And also, due to the game's tight deadlines, sadly, several multiplayer modes were actually pulled from the final game. Things like Capture the Flag, Grudge Match, and Kick the Baby was all planned for its release, but sadly, Deathmatch was all that remained, which I suppose is probably the only okay feature of the game. Originally, the title would be known as South Park Deeply Impacted for comedy reasons apparently, and although the end result revolved around a stupid story about a comet that comes close to Earth every 666 years and it's your job to save the day, with that working title in mind, Deeply Impacted, assets found inside the game actually show text from a different storyline that would have made the game, well actually the game would have probably been completely the same, but you know, whatever. Later ports, especially the PlayStation version, actually somehow turned out even worse. Besides hardcore collectors, nobody in their right mind would have ever wanted to pick this one up, even if it was the first South Park game ever released. It wasn't, however, the first South Park game ever worked on. For that, we need to jump over to the Game Boy Color. The game itself actually doesn't seem all that bad in my opinion. It's obviously nothing spectacular, it's very similar to something like a Donkey Kong vs Mario game I suppose, and although it doesn't have a crazy amount of lasting appeal, I can't deny it compared to the N64 and plenty of the other games that we'll eventually get to on this list. It doesn't play that bad, and I think it actually looks pretty damn good. The game was eventually cancelled though, due to the worries of releasing such a rude game on a system mostly owned by children, with the only carts available going to Matt and Trey themselves, which they do still have, and they keep them to simply serve a memory of the first ever developed South Park video game. Thankfully, a ROM of this game was actually leaked online back in 2018 for all to play, but before that date, you could actually play a reskin of the game as Mary-Kate and Ashley Get a Clue and the New Adventures of Mary-Kate and Ashley in the States, and for us peeps in the UK, we got Maya the Bee, which actually had a couple of sprites hidden in its code, as well as an Itchy sprite too, which may mean the game was also going to be a Simpsons related game at one point, but like I said, it was based on this instead. Yeah, I know, I've never heard of it either. Regardless, whilst researching this video, I have found quite a few people bring up a cancelled Mega Drive game. Surprisingly, although I cannot find any proof of this at all, but easily more exciting than all of this was a cancelled point-and-click adventure game called A Week in South Park by Dreamforge Entertainment, which was to be released on PC and PlayStation 1. The game, I suppose, is similar to something like the Beavis and Butthead point-and-click adventure games would have been. Real clips either designed for the game or from the show, and would have actually replicated the look, well, as best as it could anyway. It would have been split into 7 episodes, no doubt for each day of the week, and not much else is really known about this game as it was never brought up ever again.
Somewhere, someone tries to party alone.
Would you like some more tea, Polly Prissy Pants? Coronation tea!
Don't let this happen to you. Join the party at South Park Chef's Love Shack, the video game, where you and your friends get down for some major four-player fun with the Love Gourmet himself.
Ooh, chef!
So get on over to the Shack. It's one big multiplayer love-in. Comedy Central's South Park Chef's Love Shack, the video game.
Ooh, naughty.
From Acclaim.
Next up, we have South Park Chef's Love Shack, released worldwide for the N64, Dreamcast, PlayStation and PC in 1999. The game is incredibly pointless in single player and doesn't really have much going for it in multiplayer either. I mean, looking at it, it's easily dated better than the previous entry, going for a far more TV show type look, but slapping the South Park branding onto a you don't know jack sort of game, and worse still, most of the questions don't even revolve around South Park trivia. Nah, it's not for me. At best, the game is an okay play it once party game that you might want to pick up again to remind yourself what South Park and gaming used to be like about 10 years ago or so. And it does also feature a few mini games, well 20 to be precise, and they obviously range from pretty fun to downright boring, but guys, it's just so incredibly forgetful. In fact, I've got it on my shelf and I forgot I owned it. The game is yet again only worth picking up for the completionists. I suppose one of its only standout points is, of course, it's not South Park Rally. Yes, South Park Rally. This is a strange one and actually shows a bit of an evil corporateness behind the walls of video game publishing giants. You see, Acclaim liked the idea of a 3D South Park Rally. I mean, to be fair, plenty of other franchises had done it, and some were even better than the often looked at originators of the pack, Mario Kart. Yeah, by late 90s to early noughties standards, if I was Acclaim, I would have probably done the same thing. The task was simple: make a playable demo in time for E3. Okay, fine. The one thing they didn't tell them, however, was that another studio had also been asked to do the same thing. Whatever version Acclaim liked best would have been the publisher they would have gone with, and the loser in this unknown game would have had a terminated contract. Bloody hell. The end result was a game created by a driven group of individuals for all 4 platforms, might I add, again in only 7 months. As expected, the game is absolute garbage. All the games have been bad up to this point, but at least you could find some fun hidden in the depths of these awful games, but this game, you knew this was awful before you even started. It's slightly different than most titles, I suppose. Instead of all racing in one long line, in this you need to jump between certain checkpoints and you need to find your own way to them. This creates a sort of manic destruction derby sort of game, or I suppose a sort of weird battle mode attempt at mixing up the formula. The only problem is, well, you remember the Wii U version of battle mode, right? Mix that with horrendous controls, physics and literally the most annoying directional system known to man, and what you are left with is the perfect coaster for your coffee. Right, next up, well, there's not a whole lot. Like I said, this was 1999 and Matt and Trey, just like everybody else, didn't really like the games being released and decided very wisely to hold back their ever-growing IP and instead essentially not release much of anything at all. I mean, there was a whole slew of naff Java-based games released all over the place, but as usual, these were all just very basic platformers and mini-games. The real thing to note here is that considering these are all played on your old Java phones, they're really not that bad at all, considering what they are. But back on consoles, it was actually Ubisoft that came along to save the day when they went after the license, and considering popular cartoon shows had actually started to release somewhat good games, Matt and Trey went ahead and accepted. The PlayStation 2 was the lead platform for this upcoming game, and as you can see, it very much is similar to games like Simpsons Hit and Run, which actually was Ubisoft's aim when they got Buzz Monkey Studios to make it. The third-party studio did do this, however they decided to make it less like a typical GTA hit-and-run style game, which were all the rage at the time, and I suppose they technically still are, but considering they actually attempted to rebuild the entire town of South Park, they actually decided to turn it more into an adventure game that fans of the show would have most definitely appreciated. Regardless, none of this matters as the game was eventually cancelled by Ubisoft, and it is believed to be the result of one particular Ubisoft producer that actually never produced anything in the past, being a bit of a pain for the developers. This, and the fact that even though huge amounts of progress was indeed done, there was still quite a long way to go, and Ubisoft didn't want to pump too much more into it, and therefore the whole thing went down. And that is why it took so bloody long, guys. Like I said, besides the odd Java game, there really wasn't that much else. I mean, yes, there was the Sega pinball machine, which I had the pleasure of playing at a recent Play Expo last year, and seriously guys, it was a pleasure. You get to electrocute poor old Kenny, your ball can shoot over the toilet and sometimes even go in it when Mr. Hanky pops out. Seriously guys, if you ever get the chance to play it, make sure you do. It really is quite a lot of fun. Moving forward to 2007, Matt and Trey formed a small group of individuals from South Park Studios and Comedy Central to work on projects within the world of South Park that were outside of the normal TV show. That group was South Park Digital Studios, and one of the first things they did was set up southparkstudios.com. We got really sick of having to download our own show illegally all the time, so we gave ourselves a legal alternative. Yes, a site used to watch your favourite clips and full episodes, not worldwide sadly, of that classic South Park show. But looking at the website a little more closely, you will find South Park official avatar generator. I know it's not a game, but it was a sign of interactive entertainment being done right, because whilst this was going on in 2008, South Park Digital Studios was also working on a brand new game with UK studio Double Six and Microsoft Game Studios, who also helped out with some of the artwork.
Level 1! Stand the house!
Dude, Stan, get out here! What's going on, Cartman? Horrible beings are trying to get to the town. We have to hold them off here. What?
Level 1! Start!
This was the first game that the South Park team really got involved with. Extra lines were spoken, certain parts of the game designed by South Park Studios themselves, and upon its release, being that it was heavily focused on multiplayer as part of its marketing, you could have even had the chance to play with some of the people who worked at South Park Studios, including Matt himself. The game was originally titled South Park Suck My Balls, before being changed to South Park Let's Go Tower Defense Play. As you can see, it's very much a standard tower defense game, but with a South Park slap of paint on top. But as you can also see, it's pretty much going to stand up for the rest of time, as it's adopted that South Park style, the best an Xbox Live arcade game could possibly have done. It scored around about 7 out of 10 and was officially the first uncensored South Park game ever released.
It's time over!
A few years later, in 2012, South Park Studios worked with Other Ocean on yet another rather awesome looking action platformer, which serves as a sort of follow-up to the infamous and most people's favourite episode, Scott Tenorman Must Die. The game, although yet again using original art assets found on the show and yet again featuring rather impressive dialogue, which fans will get a kick out of, scored below average upon its release, with its main flaws being that the game is impossible in single player. This game is all about multiplayer, and well, it's a little bland as far as a standard 2D platformer goes. Still, it is quite fun to play. If you do get enough of you together, just don't expect too much, because the very best South Park video games were right around the corner. You see, back in 2009, Matt and Trey teamed up with Obsidian to create the ultimate South Park game, and this time to be heavily involved, as the duo was worried about publishers not wanting to get involved with such a foul-mouthed TV show. South Park Digital Studios not only did way more than simply gave constructive criticism, they also funded it. Eventually enough of a game was made to show off to bigger publishers, and it was the awesome THQ who jumped on to help the two companies continue to make the game. At the time, Obsidian was also working on another game that at the time was called North Carolina, and after 7 months of working on that, Microsoft obviously wasn't happy and cancelled the project, leaving Obsidian in a rather unfortunate position. They had to sack between 20 to 30 employees. Some of those were unfortunately working on that new South Park game. And if things couldn't get worse, THQ themselves ended up filing for bankruptcy, resulting in the studio putting the game up for auction. Matt and Trey were not happy about this. They fought against this, but ultimately lost the fight as Ubisoft come along and purchased it from THQ for $3.2 million. Within only a couple of weeks, Ubisoft decided to delay the release by 6 months to make significant changes to what had already been done, which Matt Stone did admit after its release that things did get retooled that he didn't like, and that they had also worked on the game a lot longer than other people would have liked. The end result was South Park: The Stick of Truth, and boy, it was all worth it. God knows what they took out, because what you've got here is really, really good. I'm not the biggest fan of RPGs myself, as anyone that watches my channel would know, but this one fully hooked me, and all who played it, yeah, sure it helps if you're a fan of the show, but still, it really is a brilliant game. The art style is practically perfect, capturing the style so well that passers-by would actually believe, besides the occasional loading screen, that you are actually watching the show. It's hilarious, just like the show, and even after about 17 years of South Park being on TV and the cinema up to this point, Matt and Trey still had the ability to be able to shock you. But it's not all about the visuals, although that alone could be a feature of a future documentary, but the gameplay is mostly excellent. Now, like I said, guys, I don't play RPGs, they're just not my thing, so hardcore RPG goers did in fact find the game a tad too easy and even a little too repetitive for their tastes. But if you ask me, and you probably shouldn't, ain't nobody got time for 30 to 40 hour plus 4-disc RPG time hoggers. Some of us simply just want to sit down with a good, well-rounded 15 hours of RPG goodness, and that's all it was. It was plenty. Plus, if you did want to go on a little bit more, there's loads of extra collectibles sprinkled on top. If you're a fan of the show, there is no way in hell you haven't played this game, but if you are in that 0.1% bubble, what are you doing? Go and play The Stick of Truth. It's possibly the greatest TV show licensed video game ever released. Well, actually, it's second best. During the game's release, the two did say that if the fans wanted a second game, then they probably would make one. And when that time for a sequel did get put forward by Ubisoft, the duo had to decide if it was the right thing to do. Obsidian were no longer going to be involved this time, with production moving over to one of Ubisoft's very own studios, and Matt and Trey were toying around with the idea of making a new movie. Regardless, well, they obviously went ahead with the game, didn't they? And this time, they became easily more involved than they've ever done before. 360 pages of script were written, that's double from the last game, and 20,000 lines of dialogue were recorded too. Matt and Trey became absolutely obsessed with the creation, that whilst Trey Parker was actually in hospital after an emergency gallbladder surgery, during recovery, he actually managed to convince his doctor to let him out so he can record more lines. The duo really were into this one, outside of the creation of the normal show of course, that they often found themselves watching YouTubers like PewDiePie playing the original game as a way of sort of getting feedback on what should have been done differently and implementing it into this game. Eventually, it was released, and although the novelty of seeing South Park come to life right before your eyes and, lost its shock value a little bit, you can't deny it's still a fantastic game. For me, it didn't have as many standout iconic moments compared to the first, but as a huge fan of not only South Park, but absurd amounts of comic book movies landing in cinemas every few months, This was right up my street. The fighting mechanic was a lot more interesting this time, giving you the ability to actually move around the playing field during battle, and the game itself was even a little bit longer. Thankfully, for me, it wasn't too long for my arcadey mindset, and it's a game that I have completed and reviewed, in case you are interested, on this very channel. Reviews for the time were mixed as to whether the storyline was better or not compared to the first, and in my opinion that really only comes down to your personal interest in the subject matter. But all agreed that overall it was indeed a big improvement in the gameplay. Leaving us with one final game to talk about, and it's another mobile game. South Park Phone Destroyer. This is a freemium game, and it acknowledges that itself as soon as you boot it up, saying that it shouldn't be played by anyone. It's a typical card battler game. You have cards that you collect at the bottom of the screen and you drag them up onto the playing field to defeat waves of enemies. Obviously, you technically can play the game for free, but Ubisoft don't want you to do that, which is surprising because South Park Studios actually made a whole episode mocking freemium games. But obviously, if you do end up purchasing packs of cards in game, you get to use those cards on the battlefield a lot quicker than you would do if you was actually playing it for free. You know how these games work. Thankfully, this one is a pretty good game, in all honesty. I haven't played it too much. I did quite enjoy the simplistic nature of the game, but you know, that is what mobile games are all about. And thankfully, it looks absolutely stunning, keeping true to the latest game's perfect art style that replicates the series really damn well. And, well, there you go, guys. This is South Park: The History and the Games, so far. Yep, with a franchise as big as this, it's obvious that we haven't heard the last of South Park Studios. But again, obviously, if you've made it this far, or if you're like me and you actually bloody love anything with Cartman's face printed onto it, well, that's nothing but a good thing. Here's to plenty more projects, no matter what the medium, by Matt and Trey. But for now, in true 90s South Park fashion, I think it's only fair to end this episode by passing it over to everyone's favourite character.
Screw you guys, I'm going home.
Hey there guys, thanks for checking out the video. I want to give a big special shout out to all of my Patreons, of course, but first, if you want to check the game that's playing right here, then there'll be a PlayAsia affiliate link that does help me out considerably. Please consider buying your games through that affiliate link. Anyway, back to those Patrons, and an extra big shout out goes to that retro video gamer, Gary Pinkett, Mantis, Ryan Burford, Andrew Dalton, Jonathan Haywood, Tomek Grabowski, Christopher Turnbull, Brent Craft, Ben Jackson, Phil Lowlins, Mr. Vestek, Robert Dunn, Lefty, Intrigued Gaming, Abby Morris, Tim Labonte, Asobi Quang, DX, Tim Lunge, Genovi, Hernandez, Pixels.Limited, aka Samuel Victor, Red the Beard, Conrad Constantine, Pretendo 64, Creamy Elephant, James Loveridge, Casey Garner, Blitz Hedgie, Savage Gaming Show, Gemma, Mr. T-Shirt, So Right Away, Monster Finger Games, creators of Alien Scumbag, Mike H. Fell, Lucer Softail, Ye Old Hamburglar, Gregory Arden, Buride, Ronnie Method, SSWB, Solux Captor, Jeremy Rodriguez, Nick Pollard, Bram Perez, Marcus Chemo, Cut Tyndall, June, The Geeky Dad, Richard Carter, aka Fantastic Dizzy, Todd Poolfloat G, and of course, Petty Mew. If you want to get your name shouted out, come and get your name shown, come and see what I'm working on, and get loads of exclusive stuff that these people always seem to get that you don't, then of course, please click the link that you see on the screen. Don't forget to subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, a thumbs down. All of you people that are sharing it on social media and places like Reddit, then of course, thank you to you too. Please continue doing that. And obviously, yes guys, I highly suggest you go and check out the Shitty Kickstarters subreddit, where for this particular episode, it helped me out quite a bit. But anyway, that's enough from me. This is DJ Slopes signing out, and hopefully I'll see you all next time.